What do you want your life to look like in the next 3 years? Are you trying to get stronger, or are you trying to make your first $100,000? Regardless, what if I told you that the foundation of hitting those goals is built on a single mindset? And what if that mindset was built by just taking one action on a regular basis? Well, that'd be a lie, because it's not one action. But there is a system of actions that will develop this foundational mindset. So what is that mindset? And what's the system of actions that's going to develop it? That's what I want to talk about, along with how building this mindset that we call a growth mindset actually works. Because if you don't have a way of changing into this growth mindset, then all of this seems pointless, don't you think? Because here's the thing, growth is not automatic. Change is automatic. Change is constant. However, growth is not a guarantee. And the harsh truth is that if you don't grow, the natural state is not stasis, but decay. And so we really have kind of two options. We can either grow and develop, or we can regress or atrophy or decay, call it what you want. But those are the two states of change that are constantly at play. The power of growth does come down to mindset. It does come down first to believing that we can change. And that really is the heart and definition of what a growth mindset is. And fortunately for us, once we've unlocked that belief that we can change and that we can grow, it opens up to the door of giving it a try, of actually trying to become better. And fortunately, there's also a system that allows us for consistent growth, so long as we're focused and disciplined on making the effort. And in my mind, there's a translation between all of the different domains of life to where you can see a systematic progress of growth. And the clearest domain where we can see clear evidence of that growth is, of course, physically in our bodies, because we can track it, we can sustain it, we can measure it. There's visual evidence to go along with it. So really quickly, I just want to talk about the 3-step process that enables this growth to occur, and then the 2 rules that have to be followed in order for that growth to be sustained. So really quickly, the 3 steps. First up, you have strain or activity or exercise. You actually have to get in the reps. Now, the amount of exercise or strain varies, and it depends on having one of 3 goals. Is your goal intensity of strength? Is your goal moderate strength, balanced with some endurance? Or is your goal high endurance? Those are really the 3 goals. And you would think it goes without saying, but the point of these exercises is to get to a point of failure. It's to get to a point of breaking down and getting to the highest limits of your muscles for those specific groups. And it's the same thing in developing a skill. You are trying to push yourself to your limits in the skill or in the domain that you're trying to accomplish. And that's the first step, is you have to exercise yourself to a point of reasonable failure. The second step for growth is fuel. It's fueling up, refueling specifically your body for the demands that you just put on it. And obviously in physical development, what we talk a lot about is macronutrients and calories, right? Making sure that you have enough caloric intake to recover and to fuel your body, and at the same time balanced in the correct way to where you're getting enough proteins to rebuild your muscle, and then having enough short-term and long-term energy through carbs and fats to be able to sustain that growth. And so fuel is the second category. And it's the same thing with your brain. If you're pushing yourself at your highest levels, you need to be feeding yourself at the highest levels to the according activity. One of my really good mentors when I was learning how to do visual design is he mandated for all of our classwork that we had 30 minutes per day on Pinterest, so that way we could constantly intake new ideas in addition to just creating ideas that we were just kind of coming up with. There's this great quote from Zig Ziglar, if I remember right, and he says something to the effect of, people were criticizing him about being a motivational speaker and how motivation wears off, and he says, of course it does. So does bathing. That's why you do it every day. And it's the same thing with fueling your body. If all you did was binge eat for one full day and then expected that to get you through an entire month of workouts, you would probably starve, right? Especially if you're going hard. And it's the same thing. I don't understand why sometimes we fail to feed ourselves both physically and mentally and spiritually or emotionally. And any single one of those can cause a breakdown, whether that's a physical or an emotional one. And so we have to make sure that we're taking the time to replace the fuel that we're using in each domain of our life. Now, sometimes that's something small, sometimes a quick 10-minute philosophical read. You don't have to make it super long. Sometimes 10 minutes of scripture study or 10 minutes of manual, like learning how to do something, is more than enough to help you progress. But you want to be taking on that inspiration and that internal fuel. And there's, just like how with the physical body you have fats, carbs, and proteins, you have different types of fuel that you can be taking in. Some of it motivational, some of it instructional, some of it spiritual or logical. Like, you want to be taking in these different forms, and that's why Socrates back in the olden days said that in order to make an effective argument, you had to have both logic, pathos, and ethos, right? You had to have all three balanced out in proper proportion for it to have the proper effect. And it's the same thing with your mind. And so keep that in mind as you are fueling yourself. I did that. I didn't even plan that one. Yeah. And then the third step behind all of this is rest and recovery. And that might sound a little crazy, especially in a world of discipline and hustle culture where everyone wants to go, 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 push, push, push. But just as equal is the opportunity for the muscle to have a chance to rebuild itself. And that only happens with rest and recovery. Now, obviously in the physical domain, the most obvious one is sleep. And frankly, most of us Americans probably are not getting enough sleep. But that aside, there are other opportunities for us to rest and to recover. And in the same way, just as nutrition has different forms of helping our body, our mind, and our spirits all to heal, so too does rest have that same impact. There are different forms of rest that allow us to recover. For some of us, it's quiet time with family and loved ones. For others, it's just maybe quiet time at the beach or in the mountains, just alone, personal time, working with a journal, voice memos. I mean, you name it. And so make time for it. Make time to heal and give yourself the space that you need for both strain and exercise, because that's the catalyst. That's the one that starts it all. And if you don't do it, then the others don't really stack up nearly as well, or they become waste, or they become excess, I should say, is probably the better expression. But you have to make sure that you not only get the strain, but that you also refuel, and that you provide space and time for the healing process to rebuild the torn muscle, so that way it grows into a bigger, larger, stronger muscle. And it's the same thing in life. And those are the three steps. You strain yourself, you refuel yourself, and you give yourself time to rest. Pretty simple. Now, there are two rules which make those three steps consistent. And those two rules are, number one, you have to be focused. The growth has to be targeted on a specific area and a specific domain. And the reason that focusing matters is because if your resources of time, energy, or even money are spread so thin that they can't make an impact in any specific domain, then you won't actually be able to reach the point of strain and exercise, as well as being able to provide yourself with enough fuel to recover, and as well as to just do the recovery process, right? And so you have to be focused and devote your resources to a specific area. And what I found to be the most helpful is to be focused on one area for a specific period of time. So I might be really focused on growing physically stronger for the next 6 months. And while I focus on regaining that physical strength or gaining physical strength, I might be just kind of leaving everything else at maintenance levels, so that way I can make sure I give this segment of time the appropriate amount of energy, resources, time, and just overall capacity to grow. And then once I've done that, then I will go ahead and shift over to the next area. So that's the first rule. And the second rule is closely related to it, and that's doing it over an extended period of time. Because if I'm being frank, if we're not consistent over a long enough period of time, we don't really go anywhere. Short sprints can be helpful, especially when it comes to setting a tone or setting a pattern. However, if it's not sustainable for an extended period of time, it's unlikely to grow into a mindset and a permanent system of belief. And so without consistency, things tend to slip. And this is why those two rules are so closely related, is we need to be focused over an extended period of time on specific things. And so one of the key things that we have to do as a part of this exercise is really decide what is that we want our lives to stand for? What is it that we want to grow in? And if you need help deciding on that, I actually have a video on that, and feel free to check that out here.